The Ancient Mysteries of the World Iceberg covers tons of unsolved or just downright mysterious happenings from history. In this video, we're going to talk about entries 11 through 20 in the very top section of this iceberg. So this is technically part 2, but you can jump in at any point and be just fine. So let's talk about our first mystery, the Nazca Lines in the desert of southern Peru. These are giant geoglyphs, which are basically just giant lines carved into the earth, and they represent animals or plants. Now these things are so large that it's said that they would cover over 800 miles if they were all straightened out in a line. Several different theories talk about what they think they might have been used for, the first of which being that they were astronomical in nature. They represented constellations or pointed to them, or they were important during solstices, something like that. Other people think they could have been religious. They could have been used as like blessings, getting blessings from the gods for the land and the people and things like that. Now obviously either one of these theories could be true, or they could have been used for irrigation methods or something like that, but there's also another theory that really stands out to me, and that's aliens. One guy that's just a little bit crazy said that ancient aliens probably landed in the Nazca Desert and their UFO left these lines in the dirt. This guy says that these aliens landed their UFO in the desert, then they left and started many ancient civilizations like, Egyptians. But anyway, after they did all that, they just got back on their UFO and left. I'll be the first one to admit it to y'all. It probably didn't happen, but it could have. Next up, let's talk about the Trojan War. Simply put, the Trojan War was a war between the Greeks and the Trojans in the 11th or 12th century BC. Like a lot of other historic events that happened during this time period in history, we don't really know if this actually happened. Kind of like Atlantis that we talked about in the first video. We don't know if Troy was even a real city. Actually, that's not true. For a long time, we didn't think Troy was a real city, but now they're kind of uncovering archaeological evidence that it was real. It's not just a figure of Homer's imagination. Anyway, the Trojan War is a really fun thing to talk about. So the whole war started because the Greek goddesses Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena wanted to be known as the prettiest goddess of all the land. And for some reason they asked this guy Paris, who was a prince of Troy, who was the prettiest. This guy answered that Aphrodite was the most beautiful in all the land, and as a reward, Aphrodite gave him Helen of Sparta, who was known as the most beautiful human woman in all the land, to love him. This was a problem because she was not just an ordinary Spartan woman. She was the wife of the king of Sparta, King Menelaus. She was the queen of the land. So obviously when she ran away to be with him, the Greeks didn't take too kindly to this. They mobilized their army and held a siege over Troy for 10 years. Right at the end of the war, the Greeks had the genius idea that was the Trojan horse. They acted like they were giving up, and they gave Troy a giant wooden horse as a gift. The Greeks made a show of sailing away and ending the war, but that wouldn't last. See, this Trojan horse was full of Greek soldiers, and as it was the symbol of the end of the war, the Trojans obviously started celebrating. That night, as all the Trojans were celebrating, these Greeks snuck out of the Trojan horse, and they unlocked the city gates. In the background, these Greeks that sailed away earlier sailed back in the darkness, and as the city gates were now unlocked, they stormed the city of Troy and destroyed it from the inside. The Trojan War gave us the great heroes of Achilles and Odysseus, Hector and Paris, Menelaus, and many more. But even if this isn't how it actually went down historically, because obviously the Greek gods probably weren't real, it's still huge in historical significance. The Trojan horse is a staple of the English vernacular these days. We even have like a computer malware known as the Trojan horse. So overall, the Trojan War probably did happen, but it probably didn't happen exactly as we know it. Unless you believe in the entire pantheon of Greek gods and the validity of Homer's epics, which in that case, more power to you. Next up on the iceberg is the question, when was Jesus born? Alright, so you're probably screaming at me Christmas, December 25th, and I'll give it to you. That's what we've been told our entire lives. Let's talk about it though. Jesus was born in Bethlehem around the year 0, the switch between BC to AD or BCE to CE if you're a newfangled scientist, but anyway, he was probably actually born 4 to 6 years before the year 0, so the time switch doesn't perfectly line up. But anyway, was he actually born on December 25th? Probably not. In Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, Caesar Augustus makes a huge decree to the public that everyone in his empire needs to report to their nearest city for a massive population census. Now this right here would cause super long trips for his citizens because it's very hard to travel on camel and donkey to the nearest city. It's going to take a long time. Historians say that he probably would not have done this in the wintertime, and I tend to agree with that. Also in Luke chapter 2 verse 8, Luke talks about sheep outside grazing at night, which is something that would not happen in the wintertime. If you know anything about farming, sheep come in at night during the winter. Okay, so we've established he probably wasn't born in December, but when was he born? Let's just get a little bit big brain here. We can approximate it using the birth of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was conceived in the month of June, if we believe the Hebrew texts. 6 months into his mother Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel announced the conception of Jesus within his mother Mary. So 6 months from John's conception in June is December, and 9 months after December is roughly September, so Jesus was probably born in roughly September. Now, Christmas is traditionally celebrated on December 25th because the Emperor Constantine believed in a historian's dating of the Bible, which could technically be right, but probably not. Here's why I think that. December 25th happened to be the exact day of 3 different pagan gods' giant celebrations, so it's likely that the heavily Christian Emperor Constantine just wanted to overshadow everything they were doing with his Christianity. I don't know. That's just kind of what I think, and that's what other people have said as well in my research, so that's kind of what I'm thinking there. But Jesus could have been born on the 25th of December. Whatever you want to believe. Where is the tomb of Alexander the Great, and how did he die? Alright, so this massive figurehead from history influenced basically everything we do today. Like 99.9% of culture around is because of Hellenistic culture inspired by Alexander the Great. And he did this in only 32 years of life. I actually didn't know that. That's crazy. This behemoth of a man died from a fever. It was probably not a normal fever. It was like typhoid fever, which was one of the worst bacterial diseases ever. But still, man, a fever? That's not fair. Whenever you see a great historical figure die from something small or something that could easily be cured today, or just general mistakes like the bloodletting that killed George Washington, it's just crazy, man. Now, there are other theories as to what could have happened to Alexander the Great, from like poisoning to other diseases to he could have been buried alive. Historians think he could have had Guillain-Barré syndrome, which paralyzes you from the neck down, and he could have actually been alive whenever he was buried. This speculation is backed up by the fact that his body didn't decompose for 6 days after his death. Anyway, now that I'm done chasing that rabbit, Alexander died in Babylon at the palace of King Nebuchadnezzar in the year 323 BC. After his death, his body was kind of played with, not like that, for some time. There was a massive power struggle to try to fill this gap that Alexander's death left, so obviously his body was involved. I mean, that just goes with the territory, right? His body was first buried in Memphis, not Tennessee, in Egypt, and then it was later moved to the Egyptian Alexandria. Historical figures like Julius Caesar, Augustus, Cleopatra, Caligula, and many more have been said to have visited this tomb, but here's the fun part. We can't find it. There have been over 140 sanctioned searches for this tomb since the 19th century, which is only like 200 years ago, and none of them have yielded any results worth anything. As recent as this year, 2024, there was a book published that says his tomb could be in the eastern Egyptian desert, but we really don't know. Next up on the iceberg, we have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. These gardens were one of the 7 wonders of the world, but just like our last entry, we don't know where they were. Obviously, due to the name, we can assume that they were in Babylon, but here's the thing, we don't know. There's no evidence to prove they were ever there. These gardens have 3 different origin stories that could be possible. First, King Nebuchadnezzar could have had these built for his wife, who was previously a Mede, and she enjoyed greenery, so he had the gardens built. Second, they could have been constructed by the legendary Queen Semiramis, or third, they might not even be Babylonian. They might have actually been the work of King Sennacherib in Nineveh. No matter who built them, it's clear that these things were constructed for pleasure because they included plants like horticultural plants and flowers rather than crops and food production plants. These gardens were said to be beautiful, even deserving a spot among the 7 wonders of the world. The Moai are next up on our iceberg, but you probably know them as the Easter Island Heads, or my profile picture. Easter Island, which is off the coast of South America and affiliated with Chile, is the home of over 900 of these Moai heads. These giant stone figures are constructed from solidified volcanic ash in a 3-to-1 trunk to head ratio. They have huge eyebrows and noses, as well as a chiseled jawline, and they also have these tiny little hands and arms close to their torsos. So calling them the Easter Island Heads is not completely accurate because they kind of look like this. Most of these things are buried up to their shoulders, which is why we're calling them the Easter Island Heads in pop culture these days. The average size for one of these things is 13 foot tall and weighs 14 tons. The biggest Moai they ever found was 33 feet tall and about 90 tons, which is just massive. Think about this for a second. These things were constructed between the years of like 1250 and 1500 AD by the native Rapa Nui people, so they absolutely had no heavy machinery to help them transport them. But they sure enough transported them. These things were built in a massive volcanic crater which is close to the eastern side of Easter Island, but these Moai have been found all over the perimeter of the island, so they've definitely transported them everywhere. I don't know about you, but moving these 14-ton stone figures is pretty dang impressive. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how they would achieve this moving of these things, but some people have theorized that they would set them on logs and then just kind of roll them along to their destination. But even this would take like 50 to 100 people, so it's still crazy. Ancient engineering was so crazy. You had to make do with what you had, and so many of these civilizations have done such incredible things like this. It's just crazy. This right here is why I make these videos after all, to just have been a fly on the wall, or not even on the wall because they didn't really have that many walls. But back then, flying around, seeing what these ancient people did and how they did it, it would have been amazing to me. Anyway, these Moai had actual meaning to these people, as you can assume. They were symbols of ancient spirits and their ancestors, and they were set to face out toward the village to provide oversight and guidance for the people. These things are some of the coolest statues in ancient history, so I'm very, very glad I got to cover them on this part of the iceberg. Just real quick, you guys, if you're still watching this, I know you enjoy this content, so hit that subscribe button for me. It really helps me out a lot. Next up, we have Sodom and Gomorrah. This right here is a classic biblical tale from the Old Testament. These two ancient cities were said to be a cesspit of wickedness and evil and sin, and God didn't like that, so he tasked Abraham with finding just 50 righteous people in both towns, and if he could, he would spare the town. Well, Abraham knew how bad it was, and he knew he would never find 50 people, so he talked God down to just 10 people. Spoiler alert, he did not find 10 people. Abraham's nephew Lot managed to escape the city with 2 of his daughters and his wife for a second, but his wife looked back at the burning city of Sodom and was turned to a pillar of salt, so that's just highly unfortunate. Oh yeah, and Lot eventually had relations with both of these daughters he escaped with, which spawned the Moabites and the Ammonites of the Bible, so that's interesting. Anyway, Sodom and Gomorrah were said to have been destroyed by hellfire and brimstone, but in an earthly sense, what did God use and manipulate on this earth to make that happen? History says that the Dead Sea might have been destroyed by a massive earthquake, and it sent flaming tar to cover both of these cities, just burning them up. Obviously, this is horrifying, and if you were in this city, you would know you were gonna die, but seeing flaming tar falling out of the sky onto your heads, that's wild. Okay, so the Queen of Sheba is next up on the iceberg, and this is another biblical one of sorts. It's not fully biblical. This queen was likely to be the queen of the Sabian people from modern-day Yemen, and it was said that she brought precious stones, gold, and other stuff to King Solomon. She came to test his wisdom because he was basically Mr. Worldwide whenever it came to this. It was a mutual exchange, and they both gained mutual respect for each other, but one Ethiopian legend says that they might have gained a little bit too much respect for each other. One legend, which was likely started as an Ethiopian folktale, says that the Queen of Sheba, which was actually known as Queen Makeda of Ethiopia, had a child with King Solomon after this night. This little boy was named Menelik, and he started the Christian dynasty that ruled over Ethiopia until like last century, like 50 years ago. Now, this whole story is probably just a legend, but the Queen of Sheba is like hugely historic and legendary in history. Next up, we have the question, what knowledge might have been lost whenever the Library of Alexandria burned down? So let's talk about the library first. This library was one of the most prestigious archives in the entirety of the world, and it was located in Alexandria, Egypt. This thing was burned 3 times, and the first time was actually the fault of Julius Caesar. During Caesar's civil war, with one side being led by him and the other by Pompey, Caesar was chasing this guy Pompey across different countries and seas. Well, he got his fleet of ships trapped in the harbor of Alexandria by some Ethiopian ships, and he had his men burn these ships. This fire was huge, and it actually caught part of the city on fire. It caught the Alexandrian library on fire and burned it partially. Later, Theophilus also had part of this library destroyed. Finally, Alexandria was taken over by Muslim forces at one point in time, and this leader, this guy named Caliph Omar, had them take all of the information, all the research, all of everything that was included in the library, take it out and burn it. Like, not just burn it, they burned it to start their bathhouses. Like crazy. Imagine just burning all this because it might go against your religion. It's ancient history. So basically everything that was ever accumulated in this library is lost to history forever. So what might have been lost in the fires? In a general sense, you got all these different things like philosophy, poetry, math, everything like that, medicine, could have been lost from these different cultures. This library did draw scholars from like all across the world. So there was probably information from Egypt, Rome, Persia, all the Arabian countries, Asia Minor, everything like that. Everything was probably compiled there and just burned. Ancient engineering techniques were probably there. And I'm looking at you, Egypt. There could have been text there talking about ancient aliens, that's a shot in the dark there. That's just me being a little bit crazy. But anyway, we don't know what was lost. Now, I do believe one thing though. If there was information there that was important enough to set humans back for like centuries, it probably wasn't just there. If this knowledge existed, it was probably known by different scholars all around, so it probably wasn't just lost. Other people knew it and they weren't there when the library burned down. They would have been fine. If this information had been known back then they probably would have used it to advance civilization even further. So probably anything that was lost wasn't that paramount to the society. So yes, tons of history and ancient philosophy and stuff like that was probably lost, but nothing world-breaking probably was. Alright, finally, we have the question, where was the Garden of Eden? Once again, if you're unaware of the biblical lore, the Garden of Eden was where Adam and Eve lived before Eve and Adam ate of the forbidden fruit and were cast out forever. In Genesis chapter 2, we see the Garden of Eden being in conjunction with 4 rivers: the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. Now, 2 of these I've actually heard of, the Tigris and Euphrates. Obviously, the Tigris and Euphrates have to do with ancient Mesopotamia, so you would instantly think that the Garden of Eden was there. Now, this is probably the most accepted theory because this is probably the most accurate, but where's the garden today? It's not there, obviously. There are many theories as to the answer to this, but many of them are supernatural, so I'm not going to dive too far down the rabbit hole, but I'm going to tell you these. Here's the supernatural one that I think is probably the most accurate, if any of them are. The Garden of Eden is protected by a cherub angel, as said in the book of Ezekiel, so it's probably hidden away from everybody's eyes so that we can't stumble upon this cherub angel and just get stabbed to death. Obviously, man is not going to be able to enter the Garden of Eden again if we believe the Bible, because we were cast out of that forever. So that's my thoughts on that part anyway. Anyway, there are several other places proposed as to where the Garden of Eden might have been located, but the funniest of these is that it might have been located in Jackson County, Missouri. I don't really know how that one works out. Now just imagine this. All of biblical events take place in like Northern Africa, Asia Minor, some places in Europe, all that kind of stuff. All those are the more important places, but for some reason, the most sacred and holy place in the entire world is in Missouri. Now, I'm from Arkansas, as you can tell from my hat. I wear this hat all the time because I'm a huge fan of the state. We call this place God's country because it's so pretty. It's called the natural state. Look at Northwest Arkansas. It's gorgeous. But imagine thinking the Garden of Eden is located here. That is delusional. Nothing from biblical times has anything to do with the North American continent, so just no. In any case, other theories pointed to places like Lebanon or Armenia, but this is one of those world mysteries we probably will never really know. Really quick, let me know if you're enjoying these episodes this length or if I should combine these entries to make it double length, you know, a 20 entry episode. Something like that. It might increase production time, but y'all might like it more. Just let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't seen part 1, go check that out right now. And until next time, peace.